"Excuse me, sir. This is first class. Are you sure you belong here?" The words weren't loud, but they sliced through the air sharp as glass. Julian Harris didn't flinch. He didn't need to. The flight attendant's eyes had already said enough. Her hand hovered near the manifest in front of her, but she wasn't reading it. She was reading him. From the tips of his polished brown leather shoes to the navy linen shirt tucked neatly into tailored khaki trousers, no designer logos, no Rolex gleaming on his wrist, no obvious signs of wealth, and that, to her, said everything. It was 7:42 a.m. at the private terminal of East Coast International. The new Pinnacle Air Luxjet sat gleaming on the tarmac outside, its silver fuselage reflecting the pale morning sun. Passengers trickled in, their designer bags and designer attitudes filling the cabin with quiet arrogance. Julian? He had walked on board alone, no entourage, no flashy briefcase, just his phone in one hand and a lightweight scarf draped casually over his arm. But that wasn't enough. The flight attendant, Chloe, young, nervous, blonde, offered a tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her badge gleamed under the cabin lights. "I'll just double-check the manifest, sir," she added, already turning away as though the assumption was obvious. Before Julian could reply, a voice cut across the cabin. "Don't bother, Chloe," said Captain Margaret Vaughn, stepping out from the cockpit. "Now let me pause here for a second, because this is where y'all need to lean in. Because what happens next, child, you're going to want to hear every word." Margaret Vaughn, 40-something, ice-blonde hair pulled into a severe bun so tight it looked like it hurt, pressed uniform immaculate, rank stripes shining on her sleeves, and eyes colder than the Atlantic Ocean in December. She didn't just walk down the aisle, she owned it, or so she thought. "That seat," Margaret pointed toward 2A, the wide plush cream leather seat near the front, "is reserved for confirmed Pinnacle Gold passengers. We can't have," her gaze lingered on Julian's dark skin, a half-second too long, "unverified individuals delaying our boarding process." It wasn't even subtle. A few rows back I saw a white man smirk over his newspaper. Another woman, hair perfectly curled, pearls gleaming, leaned toward her husband, whispering behind manicured hands. Their eyes landed on Julian, flickering with that same quiet, polished condescension I've seen too many times. You know the look. The "you don't belong here" look. Julian didn't react. His posture remained still, calm. He adjusted the scarf over his arm, thumbed the edge of his boarding pass, and met Margaret's stare with quiet confidence. "I'd like to verify my seat, Captain," he said simply. But Margaret wasn't having it. "There's nothing to verify," she snapped. "Chloe, check the list again, quickly." Chloe's fingers fumbled over the tablet. Her cheeks flushed pink. The manifest flickered on the screen, name scrolling past. Julian's name? Conveniently missing. Or so it appeared. Margaret turned to him, her voice smooth as silk but lined with disdain. "Perhaps you got on the wrong flight, sir. These things happen." From the corner of the cabin, Frederick Wells, self-proclaimed venture capitalist, Pinnacle Gold member, and, if we're being honest, a first-class jerk, rose from seat 2B, holding up his leather status card like a shield. "First class isn't open seating," he declared with a practiced smirk. "This isn't the city bus." A low ripple of laughter bubbled from a few nearby passengers, but not everyone was amused. Grace Patel, seated quietly in 3A, lifted her head, dark eyes sharp behind wire-frame glasses. She said nothing yet, but I caught the tightening of her jaw, the slight shake of her head. I'd seen Grace before, civil rights attorney. Fierce, brilliant, patient, for now. Across the aisle, a young black man, maybe late 20s, stylish but understated, thumbed his phone screen. His name was Miles Turner. Tech startup kid. His thumb hovered over the record button, but Grace's steady gaze held him back. "Not yet," she mouthed. "Let it unfold." And unfold it did. Margaret stepped closer, her voice rising just enough for every ear in the cabin to catch the words. "We've had issues before," she announced. "People sneaking into first class, trying to blend in." Her eyes flicked back to Julian. Blend in. The insult wasn't subtle, the implication clear. Julian remained still, composed, every movement deliberate. His eyes swept the cabin, not desperate, not pleading, observing. What none of them knew? In less than 16 minutes, that quiet black man they dismissed would rewrite the entire narrative of this flight. He wasn't just another passenger. He wasn't just some hopeful businessman trying to look the part. Julian Harris owned the jet, owned the company, owned every single contract keeping this crew employed. But they didn't know that, not yet. And you're about to watch what happens when arrogance meets reality and truth walks down the aisle wearing linen instead of labels. Before we get to that part though, tell me, where are you listening from today? Drop your city, your state, your country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And while you're here, hit that subscribe button, tap the like, share this with somebody who knows what it's like to be underestimated. Because what happened on this plane, oh honey, it's not just about seats. It's about power and respect. Back in the cabin, Margaret straightened to her full height, chin lifted high. "I'm calling security," she declared. "You can take your misunderstanding up with them." Frederick chuckled under his breath. Chloe hesitated, tablet still in hand. The other passengers watched, some curious, others quietly amused. Julian didn't move. His only response? A calm, measured nod. "Please," he said softly. "Call them." The air thickened, eyes sharpened, and beneath it all, an undercurrent of tension pulsed through the polished leather and glass. They thought they held the power. They were wrong. And in just 16 minutes, every single person on that plane was about to find out why. You ever been in a room where the air feels off, like something's about to crack wide open, but folks still smiling, still pretending nothing's wrong? That's exactly what it felt like on that jet. Julian Harris was still standing near seat 2A, calm, unbothered. Meanwhile, Margaret Vaughn, the captain with a chip on her shoulder bigger than this plane, was practically foaming at the mouth, ready to call security, ready to humiliate a man she thought didn't belong. And the rest of that fancy first-class cabin? They were watching, some amused, some curious, but a few were starting to squint, starting to question. That's when he spoke up. Caleb Grant, if you don't know the name, you will. Young black journalist, sharp as a razor, voice like velvet and eyes that miss nothing. He's the kind of man who walks into a room and starts writing the headline in his head before you even say hello. Caleb shifted in his seat, leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing at Frederick Wells, the smug silver-hued so-called venture capitalist in 2B, still clutching his sleek black status card like a security blanket. "Excuse me," Caleb said, voice smooth but pointed. "Mind if I take a look at that?" Frederick frowned, confused. "At what?" "Your card," Caleb gestured casually, "the pinnacle gold one." Frederick scoffed. "You want to verify my credentials now? What is this, TSA?" But his fingers hesitated just a second too long. Julian said nothing, but that pause, that told a whole story. Grace Patel noticed it too, sitting in 3A, her lawyer instincts flared. She folded her arms, eyes sharp, watching every detail like she was already preparing her opening argument. Reluctantly, Frederick held up the card. Caleb took it, turned it over, examined the edges. And then, that man smiled. The kind of smile that means trouble's brewing, but it ain't on his side. "Funny thing," Caleb said, holding the card up for all to see. "Pinnacle Gold changed their membership cards last year. New hologram, different format. This," he tapped the corner lightly, "is last year's design. And see that barcode? Doesn't even scan." A low ripple rolled through the cabin. Chloe, the young flight attendant, froze mid-step. Her eyes darted to Margaret. Frederick flushed red, snatching the card back. That's ridiculous. I've been flying with Pinnacle for years. But not legally, apparently, Caleb shot back, settling into his seat, pen already in hand. Margaret Vaughan's jaw tightened. But she didn't address Frederick. No. Her eyes stayed locked on Julian. This is irrelevant, she snapped. The issue is his presence in first class without proper confirmation. But the energy had shifted. You could feel it in the way the passengers sat straighter, the way their whispers grew sharper. Miles Turner, young black hoodie under his blazer, pulled his phone out again. His thumb hovered over the record button. This time? Grace didn't stop him. Chloe, still gripping the manifest tablet, looked more and more like she wanted to vanish. "Check the list again," Margaret ordered, voice like ice. Chloe hesitated. "I did, his name's not there." Caleb raised an eyebrow. Or was it removed? Silence. "Y'all ever seen guilt crawl across a person's face?" Chloe's expression cracked like thin ice on a winter lake. But Margaret wasn't cracking. She doubled down, shoulders squared. "This is a security matter now," she declared. "If this individual refuses to comply, I'll have him escorted off." Julian tilted his head slightly, the faintest hint of amusement behind his eyes. "I'm not refusing," he said softly. "I'm requesting verification. There's a difference." The room held its breath. Grace leaned forward. "Captain," she said evenly, "it's not a good look when the only person asking for the truth is being treated like a threat." Margaret's eyes flashed. "This is my aircraft until departure, my rules, but not your company," Julian replied, voice still calm, still steady, yet carrying a quiet weight that hung in the air. Frederick muttered under his breath. Another one, thinking, a nice outfit gets them through the door. Miles Turner's phone was now filming. Passengers shifted. Whispers built. Chloe's hands shook slightly as she clutched the tablet. From the back, a woman's voice cut through the murmurs. "Funny how the only unverified passenger's the one they assume doesn't belong," the woman said, her tone low but firm. It was Nia Thompson, young textile designer, black, sharp-eyed. She wasn't even in first class, but her words rippled through the cabin like a stone in still water. The atmosphere tightened. Margaret opened her mouth, likely to escalate, but Julian raised a hand gently. "No need for drama," he said. "I'm here for the truth, that's all." His gaze swept the cabin, every curious, suspicious, and uncomfortable face. "They think they know who belongs here," Julian continued, voice smooth as silk but lined with quiet steel. "But the truth?" A faint, knowing smile curved his lip. "They haven't even begun to find out." You ever notice how, when the truth starts to slip through the cracks, folks scramble harder to patch the hole, instead of just facing what's leaking out? That's what was happening on this jet. After Caleb Grant exposed Frederick Wells' fake status card and Nia Thompson called out the obvious, the tension in the cabin wasn't just awkward anymore. It was electric. You could feel it in the way people shifted in their seats, how their eyes darted between Julian and the flight crew. But instead of pausing to breathe, Captain Margaret Vaughan did exactly what insecure power always does. She doubled down. "Enough of this circus," she snapped, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Chloe, call ground security now. We have a trespasser." "Trespasser." The word echoed down the aisle, heavy and deliberate. Julian remained still, one hand resting casually on his scarf, the other holding his phone. He didn't react. Not yet. But Chloe? Oh, Chloe looked like she might throw up right there beside the galley. Her fingers hovered over the cabin phone keypad. She glanced at Julian, then at Margaret. Back and forth, torn. Caleb stood now, his reporter instincts impossible to contain. "Before you do that," he said evenly, "maybe we should check that manifest again." Margaret's glare could have frozen fire. "We've checked it." "Checked?" Grace Patel echoed from her seat, or edited. Another crack in the facade. The passengers were listening now, Phones discreetly appeared. Miles Turner's lens was still recording. A quiet storm brewing behind every curious glance. Julian spoke. Finally, but his voice was steady, unbothered. "Miss Bennett?" He addressed Chloe directly, ignoring Margaret entirely. "Did you personally generate the manifest for this flight?" Chloe's lips parted. Her voice caught. She shook her head. "No, I received it from the system, already updated," she admitted, barely above a whisper. Caleb pounced gently, his tone calm but cutting. "So if a name was missing, you wouldn't know." Chloe shook her head again, eyes darting to Margaret. Fear clung to her like a shadow. "Captain Vaughn," Grace interjected, "you're certain this manifest is untouched?" Margaret straightened her shoulders. "Absolutely. Standard protocol, end of discussion." But her jaw clenched, her eyes flickered. And that tiny fracture was all it took. Julian didn't push, didn't raise his voice. He simply reached for his phone, pressed a button, and brought it to his ear. "Confirm internal flight data for Pinnacle Air Lux Flight 247, manifest timestamp and edit history," he said, calm as a Sunday morning. The cabin held its breath. On the other end, a woman's voice replied, crisp and professional. "Understood, Mr. Harris. Processing now." Some folks didn't catch that slip. The name, Mr. Harris. But a few did. Margaret certainly did. Her eyes narrowed. The corners of her mouth twitched, uncertainty creeping in behind the arrogance. Frederick, still red-faced from earlier, huffed under his breath. "What is this? Some performance? Y'all love turning everything into drama." Caleb ignored him. Grace's lips pressed into a thin line. Miles whispered, "It's not drama when it's your life." Moments later, Julian's phone buzzed softly. "Manifest shows edit at 6:52 a.m., the woman reported. "Motion removed. Internal system flagged it as a manual override." Julian's eyes remained steady, fixed on Margaret. "I see," he replied. That's when Chloe's composure shattered. I didn't do that," she blurted, voice cracking. "I swear. Captain Vaughn told me it was already verified. She said—" Margaret spun on her, fury thinly veiled. "Watch yourself, Chloe." But it was too late. The lie was out. The room tilted. Not physically, but emotionally. You could feel the shift, like a storm rolling in off the ocean. Julian tucked his phone away, unhurried. "Funny thing about systems," he said lightly. "They remember what people try to erase." Margaret's face paled just a shade. Around them, the passengers, black, white, brown, watched and wondered. Julian straightened his scarf. His gaze swept the cabin again, and with quiet finality he added, "They haven't seen the whole truth yet. Let me tell y'all something real quick. When people know they wrong but still think they got just enough power to cover it, that's when the real nasty games begin. And baby, on this plane, the games were just getting started." Julian Harris stood calm as a whisper beside seat 2A, his scarf neatly folded over one arm, phone tucked away, eyes steady as ever. Meanwhile, Captain Margaret Vaughn, her perfectly pressed uniform couldn't hide the cracks showing through, but arrogance? Arrogance'll make a person blind to the walls caving in. Margaret squared her shoulders, her voice cold, sharp, polished like a blade. "For the safety and comfort of all passengers," she declared, loud enough for every ear in the cabin, "this individual will be removed from the aircraft until proper verification is completed." The words were wrapped in protocol, but the meaning, as clear as day. "You don't belong here." A few passengers nodded, unsure. Others glanced at one another, whispers rippling down the aisle like static electricity. Frederick Wells, still seated in 2B, leaned back with a smug grin. "Thank you, Captain," he chimed in. "First-class standards matter." Caleb Grant's pen tapped rhythmically against his notepad. His eyes didn't leave Margaret. Neither did Grace Patel's. Their faces calm, but their postures sharp, ready. Julian's voice came low. even, measured. "And the proper verification process, Captain?" he asked. "What does that look like before you resort to public removal?" Margaret didn't blink. "Ground security confirms identities. You can speak with them outside this cabin, but you won't verify it yourself," Grace interjected smoothly, eyes narrowed, "though you've accused him publicly." Margaret's lips pressed thin. "I've followed procedure. That's all." Julian's head tilted slightly, his expression unreadable. "You followed procedure," he repeated softly. "Let me pause this real quick, y'all. Because we know how that word works, don't we? Procedure. The pretty little word folks hide behind when they want to discriminate, but need it to sound corporate." The air in the cabin was tight now. Chloe, the young flight attendant, still clutched the manifest tablet like it might bite her, her knuckles white. Her eyes flicking between Margaret and Julian like watching a chess match she never wanted to be part of. From the back, Miles Turner's phone caught every second. His thumb hovered over the screen, live stream ready but restrained. For now. Caleb rose from his seat, notebook in one hand. His voice, calm, professional, dangerous. "Captain Vaughn," he began, "can you confirm publicly whether the manifest for this flight was altered manually this morning?" Margaret's eyes darkened. "I don't answer to random passengers." "But you answer to facts," Caleb replied. Grace added, "and witnesses." The murmurs grew. A woman 2 rows back whispered, "What's going on?" Her husband shrugged, eyes darting nervously to Julian. But Julian, still calm, still waiting, letting their lies wrap tighter around themselves. Margaret's jaw flexed. "Sir," she addressed Julian again, "for the sake of the other passengers, I'm asking you to deplane voluntarily." "And if I refuse?" Julian asked simply. She paused. "Then you'll be escorted off." A few gasps. More whispers. Phones appearing now, not hidden. Visible, bold. Frederick muttered, "Always a scene with these types." Caleb shot him a look so sharp it could cut glass. "Funny how this scene started with a forged status card, Mr. Wells." Margaret ignored him. But the sweat forming near her hairline, that told its own story. Julian exhaled slowly. "I'm not here for a scene," he said quietly. "I'm here for accountability." The passengers leaned in. Tension hung like fog. Margaret's lips curled in something like a smirk. "Then step off this plane, sir. Let the real process unfold." But every word she spoke, every veiled threat, it only tightened the noose of her own making. And Julian? He wasn't just waiting. He was watching. And soon, they'd all see. The thing about lies, they got cracks. And once those cracks start showing, baby, there ain't enough tape in the world to patch 'em up. That cabin, those cracks were spreading, fast. Margaret Vaughn still stood tall at the front of the aircraft, arms folded tight, eyes cold. But her voice? It didn't sound quite as steady anymore, not under the weight of 20 pairs of eyes watching her every move, and a half-dozen phones quietly recording. Julian Harris hadn't budged, his scarf draped neatly over one arm, his expression unreadable, calm, controlled. But beneath that stillness, oh, there was fire. Waiting. It started small. Caleb Grant, the young journalist, hadn't sat back down. His pen tapped lightly against his notebook, but his eyes locked on Chloe Bennett, the flight attendant, holding that manifest tablet like it might explode in her hands. "Miss Bennett," Caleb called gently, "you said you didn't alter the passenger list yourself, correct?" Chloe's throat bobbed as she swallowed. I received it already, updated, and the name missing," Caleb pressed. "Did that happen before or after Captain Vaughn arrived this morning?" Margaret's jaw clenched so hard you could hear her molars grinding. "But Chloe," she hesitated, a crack right down the center. I don't know. I just followed orders, her voice barely a whisper now. Julian's gaze didn't waver. Whose orders? He asked quietly. The room stilled. Chloe opened her mouth, but Margaret cut in. Sharp, firm. This is not an interrogation, Margaret snapped. My crew follows protocol, period. Grace Patel, seated nearby, spoke up, her tone calm but slicing through the tension. Captain, she said, you've made multiple public accusations against this man. Accusations now under scrutiny, yet refuse independent verification. Margaret's nostrils flared. This is my aircraft. Until we leave the tarmac, my word is final. Funny, Caleb muttered under his breath. Your word seems to have holes. Across the aisle, Miles Turner's phone stayed steady, recording every second. His eyes, young but sharp, caught every flinch, every tremble in Chloe's hands. That's when it happened. A soft buzz came from Chloe's tablet, a new system alert. Her eyes widened as she read it, color draining from her cheeks. Julian noticed. So did Caleb. What is it? Julian asked softly, stepping forward just an inch. Chloe's hand hovered over the screen. Internal audit pinged the manifest, flagged a manual override, unauthorized. Margaret moved so fast she nearly ripped the tablet from Chloe's hands. That's irrelevant, she barked. Technical glitches happen all the time. But the damage? Already done. The whispers among the passengers turned into murmurs, heads craned, eyes narrowed. Julian stayed still, voice low but carrying weight. Ms. Bennett, does that audit indicate who authorized the override? Chloe's lips trembled. It shows the captain's ID, time-stamped this morning, 6:52 a.m. The cabin held its breath. Caleb's pen stilled. Grace's eyes sharpened. Even Miles's camera seemed to hum with anticipation. Margaret? She tried to hold her ground, but that polished veneer, cracking wide open now. Standard protocol, she repeated, but it sounded weaker this time. Julian tilted his head. Funny how your protocol removes paying passengers without their knowledge, he said softly. The room wasn't just tense now. It was awake. They could feel it, the lie unraveling, and the truth crawling out, inch by inch. The thing about systems? They always leave fingerprints, and on this plane, the fingerprints of the lie were everywhere. Julian Harris stood there, still calm, still poised, while Captain Margaret Vaughn tried to hold a crumbling story together with nothing but arrogance and stale authority. But baby, her grip was slipping, fast. The passengers? They weren't dumb. Phones out, eyes sharp, whispers turning into murmurs. The tide was turning. Chloe Bennett, the young flight attendant, still clutched the manifest tablet like it burned her palms. Her voice barely steady. It shows the captain's ID as the override, she repeated softly, confirming what everyone had just heard. Margaret's glare could have cut steel. That's irrelevant, she snapped again. System glitches, common. Caleb Grant stepped closer, notebook forgotten at his side, replaced by that quiet reporter's steel. System glitches don't come with personal ID stamps, Captain, he said. They come with accountability. Julian's eyes never left Margaret. His posture relaxed. But the energy radiating off him calculated, dangerous in its calm. Shall we verify further? Julian offered, voice smooth as silk. A real-time audit, full transparency. Margaret bristled. Security will... But Chloe cut in. Small, shaky, but brave. There's more, she blurted. The cabin went still. Even Margaret froze. Chloe's fingers trembled as she tapped the tablet, pulling up a secondary system log. Lines of data. Timestamps. Edits. Clear. Unforgiving. The override, Chloe whispered, was requested manually from the cockpit terminal, less than 10 minutes before boarding began. Julian's gaze sharpened. And only Flight Command has that access. Chloe nodded, eyes flicking nervously to Margaret. The passengers leaned in, the lie cracking wide open now. Margaret's jaw tightened. "This is an operational matter," she barked. "Passengers interfering with crew functions is strictly prohibited." Grace Patel's voice cut through like glass. "Funny how the crew function today involves targeting black passengers and forging manifests," she said coolly. The murmurs grew louder, more phones appeared, the atmosphere heavy with truth and reckoning. Julian stepped forward, not aggressively, just enough to let his presence fill the space. "Captain," he said softly, "you altered flight records. You removed me from the manifest. You attempted to publicly humiliate me." Margaret scoffed. "And yet you still have no seat." Julian's smile was faint, deadly quiet. "I have more than a seat," he replied. "I have the system. I am the system." A few passengers gasped. Others exchanged glances, the realization dawning. Margaret? Her face paled. She was starting to see it now, but it wasn't over yet. Julian adjusted his scarf, his voice low, measured, but every word sharp enough to draw blood. "And the system," he added, "never forgets." The room on edge, the lie barely holding together, and the truth almost ready to break free. The quiet after Julian's last words didn't last long. You could feel the shift, the kind of shift you only notice when the room starts breathing differently, like every person inside suddenly woke up. But even then, even backed into a corner, some folks, they cling to control like it's air. And Margaret Vaughn, oh, she wasn't letting go. Not yet. She straightened her posture, her chin tilted high, but for the first time, her words, they wavered just a hair. "This is not a courtroom," she declared, eyes hard. "This is a private aircraft. My crew follows orders. Our passengers follow our rules." William's head tilted slightly, almost curious, like watching a house of cards tilt before the inevitable collapse. Caleb Grant stepped in again, his notebook forgotten, but that quiet investigative edge sharper than ever. "Interesting," Caleb remarked, voice even, "because last I checked, forging passenger manifests isn't a rule in any airline handbook." Grace Patel, seated still but poised, added, "Neither is racial profiling." The whispers among the cabin grew louder now. Less whispers, more mutters of disapproval. You could see it in their eyes, confusion turning to doubt, doubt simmering into quiet outrage. But the final blow? It wasn't words. It was data. Chloe Bennett, fingers still trembling, tapped again on the tablet, flipping to the audit log. Her voice cracked with nerves, but her words solid as concrete. "The system shows the override request originated from the captain's login credentials," Chloe admitted, barely above a whisper. "Not just once, twice. First to remove Mr. Harris from the manifest, then to bypass the alert flag when the system detected irregularities." A collective inhale rippled through the passengers. "Julian?" He didn't flinch, didn't gloat, just waited. Like he'd been here before. Like he expected this. Margaret's face drained of color. "But still," she pushed forward. This is slander," she hissed. "You people always twist protocol to play the victim. You people." Those two words hit the cabin like a slap. Miles Turner, still filming, muttered under his breath, "There it is." Nia Thompson, the young designer from the back row, spoke loud enough for everyone to hear, her voice tight with frustration. "This isn't about protocol," Nia snapped. "This is about power, and the fact that a black man walked onto your plane and made you uncomfortable." The energy cracked like lightning through the space, passengers shifting in their seats, some nodding, some wide-eyed, but nobody looking away now. Julian finally spoke again. Quiet, even, but every syllable landed like a weight on the floor. "Captain Vaughn," he said softly, "your discomfort isn't my problem, but your abuse of authority, that is." A moment of silence stretched, tense, expectant. Then Chloe, gathering the last of her courage, added one final nail to the coffin. I have the security footage," she blurted, surprising even herself. "From this morning. terminal gate, shows the manifest edit happening, shows the captain. Margaret's face froze, stone still, her eyes wild. The lie wasn't just cracking, now it was shattering. And the system? The system? It never lies. Julian stood, unbothered, centered among the chaos. His voice? Barely above a whisper. But the power behind it? Unmistakable. Seems like the system's ready to speak for itself, he said. The cabin? Silent, watching, waiting for the fall. And trust me, y'all, the fall was coming. See, the funny thing about power, real power, it don't need to shout. It don't need to threaten. It just waits. Quiet, calculated, until the moment's right, and honey, that moment, it was walking down the aisle of that plane, step by steady step. Julian Harris hadn't moved from his spot near seat 2A, his scarf still draped neatly, his posture unshaken. But the cabin around him, oh, it was shifting, fast. Chloe Bennett, trembling but resolute, held the tablet like a loaded weapon now. The security footage, the system logs, the truth, staring everyone in the face. Captain Margaret Vaughn? She looked like a statue carved out of fear and denial, her authority crumbling beneath her, but still, she tried to cling to it. I've done nothing wrong, Margaret hissed, voice low but frantic now. This is a misunderstanding, blown out of proportion. Caleb Grant stepped forward, notebook long forgotten, phone now recording instead, his expression calm. His words razor-sharp, misunderstanding, he echoed. Funny how the misunderstanding always targets the same kind of passengers. Miles Turner, still filming from his seat, nodded in agreement. And conveniently removes their names from the system. The whispers around them weren't whispers anymore. They were full-blown voices now. I saw her skip his ID when we boarded, a woman near the back called out. And she checked mine twice, another added. I thought it was weird at the time. Margaret's face drained of color with every word. Julian stayed silent, watching, listening, letting the truth breathe. Then Grace Patel stood up, calm, composed, her voice carried not with aggression but authority. Captain Vaughn, Grace began, right now you have a choice. A small one, but a choice nonetheless. Margaret's eyes flicked to her, defensive, cornered. You can double down, Grace continued, clinging to pride and procedure, and watch this entire cabin, this entire industry, watch you collapse under your own arrogance. She paused, gaze steady. Or you can step back, let the truth settle, let accountability happen, quietly, professionally, before it explodes. The passengers, hanging on to every word, phones out, cameras ready. But waiting. Julian finally spoke, his voice soft, measured, but the quiet steel in his tone, unmissable. I built Pinnacle Airlux to elevate people, he said. But I can't elevate those who choose to stay beneath the weight of their own bias. Margaret flinched barely, but the cracks in her expression, wide open now. Julian's eyes swept the cabin. The passengers, the crew, each face a witness to the unraveling, and with quiet, unwavering certainty he offered the final warning. You can't fly a plane while trying to bury the truth. The room, silent, heavy. The lie, dead on arrival. And the fall, just seconds away, but, no, sometimes it ain't the shouting that shifts a room, it's the quiet. The steady, the undeniable. And that cabin, it was shifting. Julian Harris didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. I'll go suggest. His words, calm, measured, hung in the air like fog you couldn't escape. You can't fly a plane while trying to bury the truth. It wasn't a threat, it was a fact. And you could feel every passenger on that aircraft absorbing it. "Margaret Vaughn?" "Ah." Her face was fighting hard to hold that proud, polished, "I'm in control" expression, but the corners of her mouth twitched. The muscles in her jaw pulsed. Her eyes, those cold blue eyes, kept darting to Chloe, to the tablet, to the growing wave of phones aimed squarely in her direction. The lie wasn't just exposed, it was suffocating her now. A man near the back, white, middle-aged, expensive watch, cleared his throat. "Excuse me, Captain," he called out, voice cool but laced with suspicion. "But I'd like to confirm exactly who this gentleman is because—" He gestured around. "It's beginning to sound like you made a mistake." Julian didn't even react. He didn't need to. Margaret's silence, her pale face, that was answer enough. Another voice chimed in. "I paid 15 grand for this seat," a woman announced. "But if this is how your crew treats passengers based on assumptions, I'll be reevaluating my loyalty." The murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. Caleb Grant's camera stayed steady, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, documenting every unraveling second. Chloe's voice cracked as she finally spoke again. He is on the manifest," she admitted softly. "The original manifest, the one before." Her eyes flicked nervously to Margaret, "before the edits." Margaret's mouth parted, but no words came. Julian remained still, but the faintest smile curved at the corner of his mouth. Not smug, not gloating, just inevitable. Grace Patel, still standing, took a slow step forward. "It's not about pride anymore, Captain," she said, voice low but carrying. "It's about whether you're willing to let this get uglier or step down quietly." For the first time, Margaret's hands trembled, just a little. Her perfect composure cracking wide open. You people, always twist things." Margaret's words faltered, the venom in them weaker now. Julian's eyes didn't waver. "The only thing twisted here," he replied softly, "is the truth you tried to bury." A few rows back, Nia Thompson nodded, her arms crossed tight. Miles Turner's camera caught everything, even the quiet satisfaction creeping across the faces of the passengers. The power had shifted completely, and Margaret Vaughn, she was the only one still pretending otherwise. But the clock was ticking, the lie was gasping, and the reckoning? Oh, honey, it was landing fast. And some folks think power shows up loud, big entrances, big speeches, big threats, but real power, it just walks in, quiet, ready, already owning the room before anyone notices. And in that cabin, power was about to speak. Julian Harris hadn't moved an inch, still beside seat 2A, still the same calm, composed man they all dismissed just 15 minutes earlier. But their eyes, oh, their eyes were wide now, elation creeping in slow, like dawn over a quiet city skyline. Captain Margaret Vaughn? She wasn't fighting anymore, not with logic. Her silence? That was its own confession. And that's when Julian finally gave them what they didn't even know they'd been waiting for. Reaching into the pocket of his linen blazer, he pulled out his phone, pressed a single button, raised it to his ear. The voice that answered, smooth, professional, unmistakably in control. "Yes, Mr. Harris?" Julian's eyes never left Margaret's. "Initiate full identity protocol," he said simply. "Internal and external verification, real-time broadcast." The words weren't loud, but baby, they were seismic. Margaret's expression cracked. Chloe's hands flew to her mouth. Passengers shifted, eyes darting between one another. The quiet gasp sweeping the cabin was louder than any announcement. The voice on the line responded instantly. "Understood, sir. Internal systems are syncing. Passenger log updated. Crew hierarchy override initiated. Public records syncing now. Julian tucked the phone away, adjusted his scarf, looked directly at Margaret, and then, with the quiet, steady grace of a man who never needed to prove anything but chose to, he spoke. "My name," Julian began, "is Julian Harris, founder and CEO of Pinnacle Ventures." Pause, a ripple through the cabin. "And, as of 2 years ago, sole owner of Pinnacle Airlux." The silence, deafening. Margaret's knees visibly buckled. Her hands gripped the seat back beside her so tight her knuckles whitened. Julian continued, voice low but unwavering. "I own this aircraft. I employ this crew. I built this company to represent dignity at every altitude." His eyes swept the stunned faces around him. Some jaws dropped. Some eyes darted away, embarrassed, ashamed. Frederick Wells. He shrank in his seat like air leaving a punctured balloon. Chloe looked like she might faint. Julian turned back to Margaret. "And yet," he added, voice never rising, "here we are." It wasn't anger in his words, it was disappointment. And that cut deeper than rage ever could. The passengers, they weren't looking at him like an intruder now. They were looking at him like the owner. Because he was. And Margaret Vaughn, her power gone, but the reckoning, it was just getting started. For a moment it felt like the entire aircraft stopped breathing. Julian Harris, CEO, owner, the man they tried to push aside like baggage. Margaret Vaughn's face? It was the color of ash. Her lips parted, maybe to deny, maybe to beg, but no sound came out. Across the aisle, Caleb Grant's camera stayed steady, capturing every glorious second. Grace Patel's arms crossed, her sharp lawyer eyes narrowing, waiting for the inevitable collapse. Even Frederick Wells, the smug venture capitalist, had sunk into his seat, his fake status card burning a hole in his trembling hand. And the passengers? Whispers turned into gasps. Gasps turned into stunned silence, the kind of silence that only happens right before the floor drops out. Julian didn't rush, didn't gloat, didn't need to. His eyes swept the cabin, calm, unapologetic. His voice, steady, but with an undeniable edge now. The quiet steel of a man reclaiming his space. "For years," Julian said, "I watched this industry treat dignity like it was optional." His gaze landed on Margaret. "Treat people like me as if we were lucky to be allowed in, let alone lead." Margaret flinched visibly. "Chloe?" She shrank back, tablet clutched to her chest like a shield. Miles Turner's phone caught it all. The subtle breakdown, the unraveling of the false narrative they'd tried to spin. Julian's words kept flowing, controlled, precise. "But here's the thing about leadership," he continued. "It doesn't come from rank stripes on your sleeves, or forged status cards, or whispered prejudices in a crew lounge. It comes from accountability." He paused, letting the words sink in. The cabin, dead quiet, no one blinking, no one breathing. Julian pulled his phone out again, tapped the screen once. A soft chime echoed from the plane's intercom.
"Land."
A smooth, automated voice filled the cabin. "Pinnacle Airlux administrative override confirmed. Crew hierarchy suspended pending investigation. Passenger manifest restored. Mr. Julian Harris recognized as owner and chief executive officer." Margaret stumbled back a step, her legs buckled slightly, her world crumbling. The passengers? Their jaws dropped, even the ones who doubted him, even the ones who whispered earlier. They couldn't deny the reality blaring through that speaker. Julian tucked his phone away, his eyes steady as ever, settled on Margaret one last time. "This cabin doesn't belong to fear," he said quietly. "It belongs to truth." And now, truth was airborne. Except Margaret Vaughn's world, It was in free fall now. Her proud posture? Gone. Her voice? Trapped somewhere between disbelief and fear. Her authority? Stripped clean right there 30,000 feet below ground, before they even left the tarmac. The passengers? They weren't confused anymore, they weren't quiet, they were wide-eyed, watching the fall of arrogance in real time. Julian Harris remained still, composed, centered in the middle of the storm he never asked for, but always knew how to weather. The intercom still hummed faintly with the system's automated confirmation. Crew hierarchy suspended. Ownership verified. Truth? Undeniable. Margaret tried one last time to salvage pride from the wreckage. This doesn't excuse your behavior, she stammered, her voice cracked like thin glass. You embarrass my crew? You undermine procedure? Julian tilted his head slightly. The faintest hint of a smile curved his lips. But his eyes? Sharp, steady, unapologetic. My behavior? He echoed softly. The entire cabin leaned in. Even the air seemed to pause. Julian's gaze swept the space, the passengers, the faces now filled with dawning realization. The ones who whispered doubt earlier, the ones who smirked, the ones who looked away. And what part of my behavior are you referring to, Captain? Julian's voice remained low, smooth, deadly precise. Standing quietly while you altered records? Requesting confirmation instead of confrontation? Or, his eyes narrowed just enough to slice through her, owning the very system you thought could erase me? Margaret's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Frederick Wells sank deeper into his seat, his fake status card practically wilting in his pocket. Chloe Bennett? She didn't say a word, but her eyes shone with the weight of what she'd helped expose. Julian turned, letting his words reach everyone now. I built this company for people who believe dignity belongs to everyone, he said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was steady, certain, immovable. And I'll dismantle anyone who tries to gatekeep respect behind uniforms or titles. He paused. His gaze settled on Margaret one final time. And you know what the funny thing is, Captain? The cabin? Silent. Waiting. Hanging on the edge of his words, Julian's voice softened to a near whisper. But it carried. Altitude never made anyone superior. It just made the fall harder. With that, the power shift was complete. The room owned. The lie dead. The lesson etched into every wide, silent face on board. And the flight? Oh, it hadn't even taken off yet. The thing about humiliation, it creeps in quiet at first, but when it hits like gravity. And Margaret Vaughn, she wasn't just falling, she was plummeting. The cabin, just moments ago filled with quiet judgment, subtle snickers, had shifted entirely. Now, it was simmering with something else. Disbelief, disgust, a dawning understanding that the woman barking orders wasn't just wrong, she was exposed. Frederick Wells, the once smug passenger, all but folded into himself. His fake status card? Forgotten. Nia Thompson shook her head, muttering under her breath, always takes receipts and ownership to shut him up. Miles Turner's phone, still recording. His face, calm, focused, witnessing the unraveling second by second. And Chloe? Poor Chloe. The weight of her silence, of her complicity, sat heavy on her trembling shoulders. Julian Harris? He didn't gloat. He didn't sneer. He simply stood, anchored, unbothered. The faint mechanical chime from the overhead speakers buzzed again as the system finished syncing. A final confirmation blinked across Chloe's tablet screen. Administrative override complete. Ownership, Julian Harris. Crew status, suspended pending review. It was official. It was public. It was irreversible. Julian adjusted the cuff of his blazer with quiet precision. His words, calm, intentional, unmistakable. "Let me be clear," he said, eyes scanning the cabin, every passenger locked in. This wasn't about a seat. This wasn't about policy. It was about arrogance. And the assumption, his eyes landed sharp on Margaret, that your uniform gave you the right to decide who belongs. Margaret's lips quivered. Her stance no longer firm, just exhausted. The lie had drained her. The truth had gutted her. Julian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of his presence filled every crevice of that cabin. "You don't control this space anymore," he continued, "and you certainly don't control me." A murmur of agreement rippled down the aisle. A few claps, nods from passengers who minutes earlier might have looked right through him. "Not anymore." Julian's eyes narrowed softly, delivering the final blow. "You see, altitude never made anyone superior," he repeated, voice dropping lower. It just made the fall harder." Margaret's shoulders slumped. The fight, gone. The lesson, loud and clear. Julian straightened his posture, giving the cabin one final look. And with nothing more than quiet confidence, he turned toward the cockpit, ready to take back the flight and the narrative entirely. The passengers, silent, but behind their wide eyes, respect, and maybe, just maybe, a little hope. The thing about truth, it never lands quietly. It shakes the walls, it clears the fog, and most importantly, it demands change. Julian Harris stood near the cockpit door now, his presence filling the cabin not with ego, but with quiet, undeniable authority. The passengers, silent, eyes wide, phones down, not because the show was over, but because the lesson had just begun. Julian spoke softly, but his words carried weight, slicing through the tension like sunlight through clouds. "I've always believed accountability starts from the top," he began, "and since I own this airline, it starts with me." His gaze swept to Margaret Vaughn, still rooted to the spot, pale, defeated. "Effective immediately," Julian declared. "Captain Vaughn is suspended pending formal investigation. Her security clearance is revoked. She will not operate or board another Pinnacle aircraft until this matter is resolved publicly and transparently." A quiet murmur swept the cabin. Not applause, not outrage, just understanding, relief. Julian continued, "The internal security audit will review not only this flight, but all recent manifest irregularities, every single override, every single bias hidden behind procedure." His eyes sharpened. "Because this wasn't random. From the shadows, systems grow, and from those systems, discrimination finds a way to dress itself as policy." Julian knew that, and now, so did everyone on board. Julian turned to Chloe Bennett. Her hands still trembled, her eyes shimmered with regret and maybe quiet resolve. "For those who made mistakes out of fear," Julian's voice softened, "there is room for reflection." But silence, his eyes flicked back to Margaret. "Silence that protects prejudice, that ends today." The passengers exhaled collectively, the weight of the moment settling in. And to ensure this never happens again, Julian added, "Pinnacle Air Lux is launching a comprehensive equity and ethics reform program." He pulled a sleek business card from his pocket, reading aloud, "Operation Clear Skies." A few passengers nodded, a few smiled, some eyes glassy with quiet pride. Julian listed specifics. Mandatory crew retraining, anonymous passenger reporting systems, quarterly diversity audits, all public, all enforceable. The cabin shifted again, not with tension, but with hope. Real, tangible, hard-earned hope. And finally, Julian ended it the only way a real leader does. His voice dropped low, measured, certain. "The sky belongs to all of us," he said simply. "And this is how we keep it that way." The passengers? Some clapped softly, some nodded, all listening. All changed. The cabin felt lighter now, not because the system magically fixed itself, but because someone had the courage to break it and rebuild. You know, listening to this whole story, I can't help but think, this isn't just about a seat on a plane. It's about space. Space to exist. Space to be respected. Space to not have to prove your worth every time you walk into a room or onto a flight. What happened to Julian Harris is something so many of us, especially people of color, especially black folks, know too well. The constant questioning, the quiet dismissal, the assumption that you couldn't possibly own the space you occupy. But here's the beautiful part. Truth, it always shows up, quiet, unshakable. And when it does, it exposes every crack in their system. Thank you all so much for sticking with me through this story. I appreciate every single one of you showing up, listening, and reflecting. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had to fight for your seat, hit that subscribe button. And hey, drop a comment below. Where are you listening from? Has this ever happened to you or someone you know? Let's talk about it.